Hey guys, my name is Daniel and in this video we will be covering how to rig a spring. You don't need to have any experience at all to follow along. When I first started rigging, I had no idea how to rig a spring at all. Everywhere I looked on the internet and anyone I asked that I knew, I found no efficient way to do so. It's crazy to me how truly simple rigging a spring can be. In this video, I will be showing you from scratch, assuming you have a little bit of knowledge in Maya. So if you're trying to find a quick way to do a spring rig and not truly understand the concept behind it, then I don't recommend this video for you. What I want to bring differently to tutorials for Maya rigging is to explain as much as I can why we do certain things and the how we do them. This way you can always apply what you learned and not have to bookmark this video so all you do is follow the steps. You'll actually know how to do it without watching the video again. I do speak on tools assuming you know a little bit of rigging. Either way, I speak briefly on some tools just in case you don't and can continue following along. At the end of the video, I will be showing you my promo video so you know how to obtain my 14-hour long course that has over 100 lectures all having to do with rigging in Maya for beginners. In this extensive course, I cover everything you need to know about rigging in Maya. I only recommend this course for people that are truly interested in getting in this industry though. Hope this video helps you out and you get the most out of it. See you guys in the lesson. Hey guys, so in this lesson I'm going to be showing you how to rig a spring. But before we actually start using the tools that we're going to need in order to rig a spring, I'm going to go ahead and show you the basic tool and how to use it in the most standard way as possible. So we're going to go up here to create polygon primitives and make a cylinder. Now we're going to go to the inputs over here and change the subdivision's height, which is just the geometry, a little bit higher than usual. And we're going to tweak the height as well. Let's just type in 8 for example. Now we're going to press E in order to rotate, hold down J, and in order to go increments of 15, that's why I'm holding down J and left mouse clicking. And now we have it all straight on the actual grid. Now the next step is in order to delete history, which is the inputs over here, in order to take this away from Maya, and also freeze transforms, which is to zero this out right here, which has a numeric value in it, and we want this to be the new default position for this geometry. In order to do so is go to edit, delete by type history, and you're going to notice on the right hand side where it has the inputs, it's going to go away. And now we're going to go to modify freeze transformations, and as you see this is now zeroed out, which is now the new default position for this cylinder. I'm also going to name this tube. I always like naming my stuff as I go usually, just so I have like a very neat scene whenever I'm working in production. Now I'm going to press 3. 3 is basically just to smooth this out. I'm toggling between 1 and 3 on my keyboard. Now the next step is to hold down spacebar, left mouse click, and go to front view. Now what I'm going to do here is go to create, curve tool, CV curve tool, and I'm going to go to this square right here, which is the option box, and I'm going to type in the 3 cubic on the curve degree. I'm going to exit out of here just so I know it's on 3 cubic. Now I'm going to hold down the X key. What X does is in order to snap to the grid. So I'm just going to hold down X the entire time. As you see, it's turned on right now. And I'm just going to click on each and every unit of this grid. As soon as I have that, you're going to see the pivot of the curve is down here in the center of the origin. So all I want to do is, as you see, whenever I rotate, it rotates from there. I'm just going to go over here to modify center pivot, so it's the center of whatever I have selected. I'm going to hold down X and I'm just going to snap it back to its original origin where it should be. Only reason I made it up here is it's just so it was easier to make. Now it has a numeric value. Now what do we have to do? We just have to go to modify, freeze transformations. Now this is the default position for that curve. I'm just going to type in here curve, just so I have the name I want. Now I'm just going to click here. This is basically X-ray. Shading X-ray is the same thing as this button right here. This is just for me to see anything inside of the geometry, just like so, just so it's easier for me to see it. Now all I'm going to do is click this piece of geometry and click on the bottom right, which is to create a new layer. The only reason I'm doing this is in order to click this V key, which is just the visibility of the layer in order for me to be able to turn it on and off. Now, I'm going to show you guys why exactly I did that in a minute. The tool we're going to be using to rig a spring, I'm just going to show you guys how it's applied on a tube, just so you have an understanding of, oh, okay, that's what this tool does. Now we're going to see how we're going to use it on a spring. Before we do that, we're just going to go to Deform, Wire. No need to go to the option box. The default settings for this wire is perfectly what we want. As soon as I click it, on the bottom left, it's going to say Wire Tool. Select Shapes to Deform and press Enter. So let's click the shape, press Enter on the viewport. Whenever you press Enter when you're on this outliner over here, it tends to want to edit the text instead of like entering fully. So I always recommend pressing Enter on the viewport. Now it says Select Wire Curve and press Enter. We're going to select the curve here in our outliner, and we're going to press Enter here in our viewport. Now there's a connection between the curve and the geometry. Now I'm going to turn this off, the V on the layer on the bottom right, in order to turn off the geometry, in order for me to be able to select this curve's control vertexes. The control vertex could be accessed by right mouse click and drag and go to control vertex, and it's basically the CVs or control vertex of that curve. Now, let's say I don't just want to move this one individually. I want to have like a nice fall off between the CVs. All you have to do is press down the B key on your keyboard with B as in boy, and you have soft select mode is on. Tap B to turn it off, tap B to turn it on. Now, what happens if I want a bigger radius than this? All you have to do is hold down B, left mouse click and drag outwards or inwards, and that's how you change the fall off of the CVs that you have selected for the curve. Now, we're going to click V on the bottom right here in the layer just to turn our geometry on. And as soon as I move this, you're going to see it's not going to be working properly. And I'll show you guys what exactly you need to tweak in order for it to work. So as you see, the curve moves, but the geometry is still in the default position. So how do we fix this? This is one of the main reasons people don't even use wire deformers, because they don't know this little tip, I guess, that they have to tweak something over here. So let's click over here on the geometry or curve. Either one's good because you could access the wire. Now we're going to click here in our wire and go all the way down where it says drop off distance. Basically, the drop off distance is telling Maya like how much distance between the wire and geometry in order for it to actually fully deform. I always recommend typing in a bunch of zeros at the end of it. Just type and press enter, just so it's infinite. The first time I used a wire deformer was for a very large environment in my production, and I had to type in a big number because it was just enormous, and sometimes this is going to be all the way over there in the scene, and you're going to want it to actually work properly. So there's no cons in order having a big number here. There's only pros, and just to make sure that whenever you pass this to an animator, it works and they don't send it back to you. It just looks bad. So just leave this as a big large number. Now, when I press V on the layer and I go to control vertex, when I move these CVs, you're going to see the geometry deforming just like the actual curve that's controlling it. So it doesn't matter where I rotate it, where I translate it. Now the curve is in full control of the actual geometry. Now, this is what the wire deformer does, just so you guys have an understanding. The curve drives the geometry and the forms of it. You have to tweak the drop-off distance in order for it to work properly, and usually it's best to have sometimes the same amount of spans, the same amount of like control vertex as much spans that you have, in order for it to deform better. You don't have to, but it's just a preference that you could have. And you could have a fall off in it just like so. So you can tweak the fall off, have a larger one in order to control more room. And that's what a wire deformer is. Why am I explaining what a wire deformer is? Well, that's what we're going to be using in order to rig our spring. So now that you have an understanding what exactly we're going to be using and what it does, I'm just going to delete these three, press delete, and I'm going to right mouse click this layer and delete layer. So we're starting fresh. Now I'm just going to rig a spring, show you guys how to do so. We're going to go over here to create, polygon primitives, and click helix. Helix is just a fancy word for spring. So I'm going to press 3 in order to smooth this guy out. 1 is the normal default without smoothness, 3 has the display smoothness on. And we're going to go to inputs over here and we're going to tweak some settings now. Coils, let me tweak height first just so coils can make sense. Height is pretty much height. Coils is how many coils this actual spring has. The more, the better, I would always say. The less doesn't really look like a spring to me. Now, the width is just how wide your actual spring is, and the radius is of the actual radius of the spring that you're tweaking. Now, let's say we have the height as 6. Coils, I like having a pretty good number. Let's say 6 as well, just so we have an actual number here. Let's type in 3 just so we have full numbers, no decimals. Doesn't really matter, it's just out of preference. And I'm going to go over here to my outliner and type in spring. Now, again, this has inputs, so we're going to go to edit, delete by type history. Keep in mind when you delete history, you cannot go back to this. But once you're like fully know that that's the shape you want for your spring, or anything that you do in Maya, I do recommend deleting history just because it's a much cleaner scene when you pass it on to animation. And we do not need to freeze transforms because everything's zeroed out. Scale is always default 1, so always remember scale is 1 because if this is 0, it's basically scaling it to nothing. So always remember the default is 0 translates, 0 rotates, and 1 scale. So without further ado, this is how you go about rigging a spring. First of all, when you make your helix, you're going to want to make sure that it's not closed. By closed, I mean like this right here, this cylinder is touching this bottom cylinder and this bottom cylinder is touching this one, as if the spring was actually, tightened up and closed. You want to have it slightly open just like so, because if it is closed, it will not properly deform or work. So what do we do now? So all we have to do is go to edges. So I'm right mouse click, go to edge, and just double click one of the edges. I'm going to click B because there's a fall off on. And as you see, I just double click any edge right here. And we're going to go to modify, convert, and we're going to go to polygon edges to curve option box, which is this rectangle right here. Now, edit, reset settings. Best guess in 3 cubic is perfectly good for us. We're just going to click convert. And we're going to type in spring underscore curve. Get into the habit of typing in like whenever you make something, because as soon as you add more to the scene, you're going to get lost and you're not going to know what exactly is happening. So as you see here, our spring curve is actually following the actual full spring. This is much easier to do than actually making a curve and click, 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 and going all the way down. This is a very quick and easy way to do so. Now, all we're going to do is make another curve, which is 3 points, because we want animators to just use 3 controllers in order to animate the spring. So what I'm going to do is hold down spacebar, left mouse click, and go to front view. And we're going to go to create, curve tools, CV curve tool option box, and leave it on 2 actually, because we're going to be making a 3-point curve. If it's left on 3 cubic, it doesn't actually give you a curvature when it's 3 points, but on 2, I'm just going to show you guys just so you see. I'm holding down X in order to snap to the grid, and I'm going to close out of this guy. Right mouse click and drag, go to control vertex, and when I move this, you're going to see a nice curve. And the other way, for 3 cubic, 3 points, it doesn't really work that way. It's only when you have 4 or more points that has a curve for 3 cubic. Now, once we have this, all I'm going to do is go to object mode for it, and we're going to center the pivot, just so this pivot right here is here. So we go to modify, center pivot, hold down X and left mouse click all the way to the center of the origin. Once we have that, what do we have to do? We have to freeze transforms. Modify, freeze transformations, so this is zeroed out. Now, what I'm going to do is I like having this control vertex, the top one and the bottom one. Left mouse click, go to front view. I like having it a little bit more above than the final spring that there is. So I'm just going to move this guy up here. It's just in order to get better deformations for us whenever we're going to open and close the spring. and this guy a little bit lower than what it has to be. Middle one's perfect, it's in the middle. Go to object mode, left mouse, hold down spacebar, left mouse click, go to perspective view. Again, let's name our curve that we just made. So we're just going to call this main underscore curve. Now we have two curves and we have a spring geometry. So what's next? Well, now we have to actually use the wire deformer tool that I just used for the tube that we made in the beginning of the video. So let's go to deform and we're going to click wire, select shapes to deform. Well, it's the geometry, press enter. Now select the wire curve. It's the spring curve, press enter. Now there's a connection between the spring curve and the spring. But before we do anything, let's go to deform, click wire again, select shapes to deform. We're going to click the spring curve first and press enter. Select wire curve and press enter. So we're going to click now the main curve and press enter. So basically what I did here is the spring curve, which is the curve going down the spring, is driving the actual spring geometry. But now this spring main curve, the main curve right here that has 3 points, is going to be driving our spring curve. Why did I do this? Well, I didn't want animators having to animate this one or tweaking the CVs for this guy, because it has way too many CVs for an animator. They will hate you. So we're going to be animating these CVs of the main curve, which is just 3, which is very reasonable for an animator to animate. Now, why doesn't it work if we already made a connection? Well, if one of you guessed it right, it is the drop-off distance. Click our geometry, the spring. Let's go over here to wire, and we have to tweak this guy up, remember, because if it's left in 1, it's not going to work at all. So I'm just going to press enter. Now I'm going to go to my spring curve, go to the second wire right here, and turn on the drop-off distance as well. So for both wires, you're going to want to turn on the drop-off distance. Now, I'm going to go to my spring curve right here, and I'm going to press Control H. This is just to hide it. The selection is now hidden. To show hidden items, click Shift H, so now you know. And all I'm going to do is hold down right mouse click and go to Control Vertex. Now, when we go ahead and deform this CV, it's going to be controlling the geometry just like so. And we can actually go ahead and close this guy, select the bottom CV and close them. And we have a nice spring rig. We could close it and I'm pressing undo, which is Control Z or Command Z if you're a Mac. So press undo and you could open it, close it, anything you want. If this, I'm just going to show you guys real quickly, if the helix that we made in the beginning, we left it like this default and then try to do everything I just did, which is make the spring curve and the main curve and do the connections, it would not work at all, because Maya, once this spring curve would wrap around, let's say the curve is this line right here, it would pretty much deform the top and bottom cylinders are going through and wouldn't really know what exactly it's deforming. So pressing undo again, we like having it slightly open so Maya knows, and we like having this CV on top of the spring a little bit and this CV on the bottom of the actual geometry a little bit. Because what I notice is if you have it in here, even though if it's right on the line of this geometry, whenever you go to close it, it doesn't really deform properly and it just gives very weird functions to it. But having it above a little bit and below a little bit slightly, you can actually open and close it quite nicely. Now, you're not going to give animators CVs to animate. That's a huge no-no. So all I'm going to do is add some clusters and I'm going to add some controllers and we're going to be done very quickly with this spring rig. Now, all we're going to do, I'm going to show you what clusters is real quickly. We're going to click this spring and press Control H as well to hide it, because we're just going to be working on this curve right now. So we're going to right mouse click and drag to Control Vertex, click the top CV, go to Deform, and we're going to click Cluster. Cluster is basically something which is in space that you can see in the viewport that deforms a vertex or a control vertex. So you could potentially use a cluster in order to deform vertex or vertices, in a geometry. I don't recommend using a cluster for that. I use clusters more for technical things like this, under the hood stuff. So cluster just deforms this CV. Reason for it is because if you go to control vertex, let's select this bottom one right now. You're gonna notice there is no channel box really which translates, rotates, or scale. But if you click the cluster, you're gonna see translates, rotates, and scale. So if I move this cluster over here and I want to zero out, all I have to do is type in 0 on this translate and it goes back to default. But if I have a control vertex selected, a CV, there's not really a very easy way to do so. So that's why we use clusters. Now, as well, we don't really give animators to animate clusters. We put a controller above that. But let's just finish off making 2 more clusters, and we're going to make our controllers, and we're going to be very close to done. So let's go to deform, cluster, and now I'm going to select last CV. Now, if you're using a tool multiple times and you're gonna go up here to form cluster, you can simply click G on your keyboard and it does the last tool you used, and it's just a much quicker way. In order, if you're doing something very repetitive, you just could press G and do the last tool used, and it's just much quicker and much more easier for your workflow. It's just a little tip. Now let's type in top underscore cluster over here on our channel, our outliner, and I just press select it all, press Command C or Control C if you're on Windows, and I'm gonna paste it, which is Command V on Mac or Control V if you're on Windows, and I'm gonna type in mid, and I'm gonna do so for this one, type in bot for bottom. Now we have 3 clusters, each one controlling the actual CV. So what do we do now? Well, now what we have to do is make 3 controllers for these actual clusters. So let's just go to create NURBS primitives and let's go to circle. Now, once we have the circle ready for us, I'm going to leave this one here because it's perfectly in the middle. All we're going to do is press Control D if you're on Mac, or Control D if you're on Windows, Command D if you're on Mac, and that just duplicates the controller 2 more times. Each time is 1. And we're going to hold down V and snap it here to the cluster. Now, lately I've been noticing that whenever I try to snap to a cluster, it never snaps right on top of it. So what I do, like a way around this, is I click the top cluster, for example. I go to attribute editor over here, and you can go to top cluster. I'll show you 2 ways. You can go to top cluster, go to pivots, and display rotate pivot. That way, when I ever hold down V in order to snap to a point and left mouse click and drag, it snaps right on top of it. The other way, let me go ahead and turn it off before I forget. The other way that you can do this in order to like snap whenever things are not snapping properly, I'll do it for this bottom cluster right here. Let's select the curve, for example, as well. Go to the attribute editor, and we're just going to be turning on in this curve shape over here, not the curve, but the shape of it. We're going to go to component display, and we're going to click display CV. That way, it's always showing the CVs, even though we're not clicking control vertex, it's always displaying those control vertex. Now we're going to click the bottom controller, hold down V, and just snap, click and drag and snap. And it's snap now to the bottom cluster. It's just ways to go around whenever things are not snapping properly. Usually clusters and soft modifications give me that issue. Soft modification is right here. It's basically like a cluster but with a fall off and so much more control. In my 14-hour long course, I do show you guys like every single tool here in my rigging with an in-depth explanation in it. I do recommend you guys take a look to that if you're actually interested and want to be in the industry and have a good understanding of rigging. Now, what are we going to do now? We're going to be naming these controllers first of all. So this one is going to be called top underscore CTRL. In rigging, you always want to like try to keep things short as much as you can. Instead of typing controller, we just type CTRL usually, or CTL. I'm going to copy this, and I'm going to just type in paste and type in mid. And for this one, we're going to paste and type in bot. There's an issue now. As you see, we have numeric values. We do not want that because if, for example, let me show you what happens if you don't freeze transforms. I'm going to type in 0, goes back to default. That's not what we want. We want the new default to be on this bottom So let's select all three controllers. You can freeze transforms more than one controller at a time. Let's go to modify freeze transformations. Now, let's say we have this move, then we type in 0, it goes back to its new default position. So all I want to do is go to this spring geometry and click Shift H, which is to unhide it. And I'm going to notice the controls are actually pretty small for what I want it to be. So we're just going to select these 4 controls, and the easiest way is in order to just scale it, all 3 of them at the same time, in order for an animator to easily be able to select that controller. As soon as I have a actual size that I like and it's easy to grab, I again have to freeze transforms because we do not want numeric values here, and it's back to default. So what do we do now? So now we got to make a connection between the controller and the cluster. So how do we go about that? One way is to simply select the top cluster and then shift click this top controller on the viewport and press P. Now wherever this controller goes, that cluster follows. That's one way. Now the other way that you can go about it, there's not really a pro and con. I usually tend to do just parent constraints. I'll explain why exactly I do a parent constraint. So we're going to select now the controller first, and command or control right click the top cluster on the outliner. Whenever you're pressing on the outliner, it's usually command or control right click. Whenever you're pressing on the viewport, it's shift instead. So now, again, controller first, and now cluster. This is only for parent constraints, guys. Let's go to constraint. We're going to go to constraint option box over here, and we're going to edit reset settings. Now, we either way maintain offset on or off will be the same. There is no offset between the cluster and the controller because both of them have the same actual pivot point, which is right here. So it wouldn't really matter what we have on here. So we're just going to press add. Now, what it does, instead of having this cluster underneath the controller right here, now you're going to notice there's something called the parent constraint. Reason I like using constraints more is just so I have things more organized in my actual outliner. As you see, it works exactly the same. So for example, I'll have this organized like under a clusters group, this one under a controller group, and this one under like geometry, and so on and so forth. Whenever you put this cluster underneath the controller, sometimes it becomes a little bit of an issue finding this cluster again in the outliner if you do not know ways around it. So I'm going to continue to do parent constraints. So we're just going to command or control right click the mid cluster, go to constraint parent, and we're going to select the bottom, and we're going to select the bottom cluster and press G, because again G is the last tool you used and we made another parent constraint. Now let's go ahead and organize ourselves just so we're a little bit more neat. I'm selecting all these 3 clusters. I'm going to press Command G or Control G if you're on Windows, and I'm just going to type in cluster underscore group grp. Now I'm going to select all these 3 controllers, Command G or Control G if you're on Windows. I'm going to type in ctrl underscore group. And this, I'm just going to type in Command G or Control G. I'm just going to type in misc as miscellaneous because they're not really, it's just like the under the hood type of stuff in order for it to actually work properly. We can even go ahead and hide this main curve with Control H. And we can go to our cluster group actually and click Control H to hide the clusters. And we're going to go to Spring, Command G or Control G, and type in geo underscore group. Then we're going to shift click all of them. This is very important, guys, in order to do Spring rig underscore all is what I've come accustomed to. This is very important to have everything organized. Always assume an animator or another rigger is going to go to your scene and has to fix something. They want this as organized as possible for anybody else to actually be able to fix. Sometimes I had situations in productions that people named things differently. At least they named it properly and it was easy for me to find. Some others didn't really name this properly and it was just a mess, and it was very, very difficult to actually fix a rig for them. So I always recommend having a proper naming convention that anybody can read. Anybody can know that this is control group, miscellaneous, and so on and so forth, instead of having a messy outliner. Messy outliner is just a messy production. Now, all we're gonna do now, because this is working, just to show you guys, I haven't showed you guys. Top controller deforms here, the bottom controllers deforms the bottom, and this one deforms the actual center of it in order for you to tweak it however you wish. Now, as you see, rotates doesn't really do anything here because there's only 3 points in the CV. So I'm going to show you the whole entire thing in order to have a proper spring rig. And let's select all 3 controllers. We're going to go here and click and drag all of these. And we're going to right mouse click and we're going to lock and hide. Lock and hide locks the controllers and hides them so animators can't be able to reach them as easy as possible. There is ways to bring it back up, but for now we're just going to lock and hide them, so all an animator could do is translate and they can't rotate or scale or turn off the visibility of the controller. So now what we're going to go ahead and do is lock in hiding all of these group nodes we made here on the left hand side. What you can do, instead of going one by one, you can just shift select all of them, click and drag all of these channels in the channel box, right mouse button, and go to lock and hide selected. Reason we lock and hide group nodes is first so animators can't reach them, but most importantly is just to have a much cleaner scene in your rig. Now, as well, notice cluster group is hidden, but these top, mid, and bottom cluster visibility is on. Always keep in mind, these are the children, this is the parent. The children inherit whatever the parent is doing. In this case, the parent is hidden, so therefore the children are hidden as well, no matter what it says over here. So in my course, in the 14-hour long course, I explain every single detail having to do with rigging, and I also talk about parent and child relationships, and also what's the difference between a group node and having just like a parent and constraint over here, or a parent to child relationship. It's just all different, but I do go into very fine detail in that. Now, as you see, everything is locked and hidden. The top controller, let's move it around, translate it, it's working. Middle controller is working as well, and the bottom controller is working as well. Now, one more thing I want to go ahead and do is, if I actually want to transfer this and move it around our scene, instead of having to select all of these 3 controllers every single time I'm going to animate it or move it, I want to actually be able to move it anywhere in the scene with other separate controllers. So let's go ahead and make a main controller. So let's go up here to the top left and create, nerves primitives, and let's make a circle. Also in my course, I do show you guys how to make like unique controller shapes and everything like that, in order to not just, keep on making circles for your entire rig. It's just a much nicer way to present your rig in a studio. So let's, for example, make these our main controllers. I say these because we're about to duplicate this guy. So all I'm going to do is press Command D on my Mac. If you can press Control D on your Windows. And I'm just going to type in the positive, and now we have it in both sides. Now, what I'm about to do is show you guys how to make this controller and this controller one controller. By that I mean, whenever I select this one or I select it on this side, it's still the same controller. That's just in case, like, let's say you're working on this side of like your rig and you're animating. Instead of having to select it on the other side, you can just select this one and it's much quicker. So I'm about to show you guys that. So follow these steps, but most importantly, hear me out so you understand why we're doing it, just like everything else I show you. Now, you want to freeze transforms and delete history for sure here. On everything you do, typically it's freeze transforms, delete history. But why is this so important for what we're about to do? Well, if you don't, then typically what happens is this controller ends up right on top of the other one, and you don't have 2 controllers on each side that is the same controller. So let me just go ahead and show you what to do. Over here on the edit, again, delete by type history, and let's assume I don't freeze transformations. It's either way, you guys are going to try like what's going to happen, so it's much easier if I just go ahead and show you sometimes. I'm going to just, before even typing a proper naming convention, let's do what we're supposed to. We're going to select the shape node of this controller. So all you have to do is click the controller and press down arrow, and you'll get to the shape node. Another way, if you're more of a visual person, don't really trust pressing the down arrow, you can go over here to display on the outliner and click Shapes. You're going to notice all of these have a plus sign. If you click one of them, you're going to see the shape nodes right underneath it. In Maya, this is the transform node, which has all the numeric values, like where exactly it is in the viewport and the scene. And the shape node is basically the shape of your object that you have selected. So again, we select the shape node, or you click it and press down arrow on the viewport, and then you press Command or Control. If you're on Windows, right click here. As well, you can just press shift click if you're on the viewport. Just all depends, like either if you're working in the outliner, if you're working on the viewport. So what we're gonna do here, make sure you click, if it says Python, click it, and make sure it says mel. If it's mel, you're good to go. What we're gonna type is in parent-r-s, which means relative and shape, and we're gonna press enter. Remember, I did not freeze transforms. I'm gonna show you what happens when you don't. You're gonna notice this shape is gone. Basically, this shape node is right on top of one another right here, which is not what we want. So let's do it the proper way. I'm just pressing undo, which is Command 0, Control Z if you're on Windows. Now let's freeze transforms, modify freeze transformations. You guys might have noticed I have a freeze transform button here in my magic shelf. I never changed the name of this ever since I made it up in 2013, I believe, when I first started rigging. So my magic shelf has freeze transforms, as you see. I also as well show you guys in my course like how to make like proper shelf buttons and have like the most ideal ones that you tend to use over there. Now, freeze transforms are on. Everything has a 0 slate on it, except this one because we had the shape node. Whenever you freeze transforms, never freeze transforms the shape node, because look what happens when I do it. The transform node still has numeric values. So always keep in mind, you're always going to be selecting transform nodes whenever you're selecting on the viewport. But always keep in mind, like whenever you do click display in shapes and you're on shapes, just keep in mind you might not be freezing transforms of the transform node, which is this. So let's freeze transforms here. Everything's good to go. I'm going to press down arrow to get to the shape, just like I mentioned to you guys, which is just much quicker. But if you're a visual person, I do recommend going here just in case, and once you're beginning. And I'm going to click shift on this controller, do my little script, which I was taught actually in school a long time ago by my instructor. And it's going to be parent-r-s, and I'm going to click enter now. Once I have that, when I select this controller, I'm really selecting this one as well, and the same vice versa. You're just going to notice there's a transform node here, but it's not transforming anything. That's basically because you took this transform node was for this controller right here. You basically took the shape node of this controller and transferred it to the transform node of this controller. So just for you visual people, let's go to display shapes, and you're going to notice this shape node right here was right underneath this transform node. So you basically just transfer that shape node up to this transform node of the other shape. So that's all you basically did. Let's go to display shapes to turn that off again, and you can delete this transform node. That's basically just a null group, or in other words, just a group without anything in it. So let's go ahead and delete that. The next thing you want to do is center pivot. I'm just going to click center pivot here. If you don't have your shelf button, remember it's modify center pivot right there. And now we have a controller that's on both sides, and you could transform, rotate, scale, etc. Now, how to make this the main control. First of all, let's type in main_ctrl. Let's click our control group, which is command right click or control right click if you're on Windows, and we're going to click P, which means to parent, which is basically like the last thing you select is what I want the parent to be. So you're going to notice the main control is right underneath the control group, and we're going to want these three controllers to be the child of this main control. So you can just press shift, click the main control, and press P again, which is to parent. And you're going to notice here in the outliner, the main control is the parent, and these three are the children of this main control, and all these controllers are the children of this control group. But whenever we go ahead and move our main controller, this is exactly what happens. We can rotate, we can translate, and it's good to go. So let's lock and hide these because we do not want animators touching the scale or visibility. And now we have a fully functional spring rig that could be translated anywhere. As well, you're gonna notice this is kind of annoying that it's aiming in the world space still, even though it's very much rotated just like so. All you have to do in order to change this is hold down W and then left mouse click and drag to object. You're gonna notice it's actually following the normal and where the control is facing. So it's just a much easier way to animate and also to rig whenever you're like in the process of rigging. So as you see, I'm deforming my spring however I wish, and as well whenever we move the main control, the shape still has the same proportions as it used to. So let's go ahead and just select this, click and drag, press 0, and we're going to select all three controls and zero it out as well. And now it's back to default position. One last thing I wanted to show you guys real quickly, just if you want to actually, do this properly. Let's go to Attribute Editor when I have the main control selected, and all we're going to go ahead and do is change the color of our controls, because that's what a proper rigger does. It has the best and easiest way for an animator to have an appeal to the rig, because keep in mind, also something my instructor taught me, some of these animators see these rigs for quite a few months, so you want to make it as pleasable as pleasurable to the eye as possible. So you always want to make it not too colorful that's just distracting, but a reasonable amount that it's easier for them to just work with overall. So I just went to the main control, I went to display, and I went to drawing overrides. I enabled overrides over here on the right hand side, and I'm just going to do a bright green, which is typically for moving or going objects. Now, all I'm going to do right now is change the top controller, enable overrides, and let's go ahead and just make it a white color. And we're going to make the middle as well a white color right here. And lastly, we're going to make this bottom one a white color as well. Now, there's no real preference for when you're like doing colors either on the transform node or the shape node. Only thing is, as you guys notice, when I change the main control to bright green, everything else that's the child changes. So I do highly recommend not doing it in the transform node. You could just do it in the shape node. I just did it because it's very simple. It's just three controls. But when you're doing a full biped rig, which is a human or a two-leg creature that has multiple controls and a lot, like 20 times more than this right here, then you do just want to go ahead and change it in the shape node, which is the same thing, object display, drawing overrides, enable overrides, and change the color. So always keep that in mind. Do it in the shape node when you have like a very complex rig that you don't want to start tweaking too much, and it's just much easier to keep it that way. But this just has four controls. It's very basic. And now I'm just gonna hold down shift and click this minus button over here in the outliner to close everything. And now you notice we have a move control, translate, rotate, and as well this is following the axis because we changed it to object mode. Now keep in mind that object mode, it's not gonna, like, let's say you give it to your animator and they have it in world mode, their Maya, it's gonna be in world mode, so they just gotta switch it to object mode. Just keep that in mind just in case you're fairly new and just think just because you changed it, somebody when they open in their Maya, it's gonna be the same thing. You just gotta take note, like, no, you gotta keep it in object mode in order to easily animate it. And that's exactly how you go about making a spring rig. It's very easy compared to how I thought it used to. It was much more of a hassle trying to figure this out, but it's pretty cool. I mean, to make it long and you could put it anywhere in your scene. And yeah, that's how you go about making a spring rig, proper spring rig, where you make the controls nice and neat, keep your scene nice and neat. Always keep that in mind whenever you're rigging. And that is how you do it. I will be posting other videos as well in this channel in order to show you guys a little bit more like stuff that I tend to like had a hassle with when I first started rigging. I will be making videos, and towards the end of this video right here, I will be showing you like a clip promo video actually to my 14-hour course, And in the link in my description for this video, I will send you to a link where my 14-hour course is located at, just in case you are fully interested in becoming a rigger in this industry. It's not for everybody, but I do want to show you guys that rigging's really not that difficult. As I always mention to everybody that asks me for help, it's just a matter of you finding the right instructor that breaks it down for you and not just you following a tutorial step by step. I think it's much easier you following fundamentals and you understanding them, so you don't have to bookmark this video every time you want to make a spring rig. You could watch this video maybe twice, do it once on your Maya, and you already know right off the bat what you have to do in order to do so. Because keep in mind, a company or a studio, anything like that, isn't gonna hire someone that has to watch a video every single time to do something. You gotta become a specialist and actually know what you're doing. And maybe you could apply this spring rig for something else that you're working on. So it's just not for springs per se. I imagine I use the wire deformer, which is something for like tubes and stuff like that that people typically use it for. And I found a way in order to do it for my spring and actually have like a nice clean rig for it. So it's always testing it. My videos as well, I always show you guys like ideas of what you could possibly use certain things in Maya for that are not typically meant for. And yeah, some people that have seen my course, actually, just to give you a little bit of insight, have been very helpful for it with it. Like the videos explained very well the fundamentals of like rigging and every little detail of it, and they're actually understanding rigging much more, which is so amazing for me to know, because the biggest problem for me when I first started was just watching videos all over the internet, not really finding something ideal and straight to the point, but not too straight to the point that I'm just following the tutorial and not really learning and like applying it without watching my notes or looking at my notes and watching the video again. So that's what I'm trying to bring to this channel in order for you guys to fully learn how to do rigging and do it properly, not just rig to rig, but actually have a clean rig and actually have something ready for production. So I will see you guys in the next lesson if you do choose to watch another video. And at the end of this video right now, I will be showing you my promo video, and the link will be in the description below. Thank you so much for watching. Take care. Welcome to Rigging in Maya 2016 for beginners. Now, assuming you got here after watching multiple videos all over the internet and not really understanding what rigging is quite yet, or you did not grasp the concept of rigging, you don't have to look any much longer anymore for an entire course that breaks it down entirely like this one, to the point you understand fully the majority of rigging fundamentals. Now, you're not just going to learn the how to use the tool, but actually you will learn the whys you would use that specific tool. I see a lot of tutorials just showing where a tool is at, and that's it. Anybody can do that on their own. Instead, I go a bit more in depth, and in some actually give you ideas for why you would use a certain tool. Also, you will be given plenty of knowledge in rigging that you'll be able to decide which tools are best for the specific character, vehicle, prop, or environment you're rigging your production. Rigging is truly not that difficult as some others make it seem to be. It all just depends on how well the instructor is knowledgeable in it, and even more important, how well explained it is. This course is about 14 hours of the basics of rigging in Maya with a bit more advanced techniques towards the end. You will come out this course with a very strong grasp in rigging without a doubt. Now as well, this course is made using Maya 2016, but the rest of you that have an older version of Maya can also follow along. If you feel you need extra help in comprehending rigging, or you heard it's tough, then I highly recommend you to take this course to finally be able to actually understand rigging. Thank you so much for your time, and I will go ahead and see you guys in the first lesson.